It's Tuesday, March 31st. Here's the 8th grade lesson for the week. This is just a review of the nonfiction text structures that I posted a while back. The first lesson with the short videos was originally posted on March 17th. We're going to go back to those and just do a quick review. I would like the 2 assignments that were posted on that date to be turned in by Friday. So in this lesson, we're going to review the 5 types of nonfiction text structures: description, chronological or sequence, cause and effect, problem and solution, compare and contrast. So if you want to follow along and do the worksheet with me, then I want you to go to go to our Google Classroom, go to classwork, and then under the topic reading nonfiction text structures, understanding text structures, you're going to find an article, a PDF, called Identifying Text Structures, the Middle Ages. On this assignment, there are several short paragraphs describing life in medieval Europe, and what we're going to do is I'm going to go through them. I'm going to be highlighting the signal words and the key ideas that will help you decide what text structure is being used. So looking at this town life article, I'm going to be going through it, reading it with you, and then highlighting some of the key ideas or words that would help me figure out what the author's purpose is for writing this article. Is it chronological sequence? Is it cause and effect? Is it problem solution? Is it descriptive? So follow along with me if you have your article open, and then we'll answer the first couple together, and then I'd like you to finish the last few by yourselves. Town life. Following the year 1000, peace and order grew. As a result, peasants began to expand their farms and villages further into the countryside. The earliest merchants were peddlers who went from village to village selling their goods. As the demand for goods increased, particularly for the gems, silks, and other luxuries from Genoa and Venice, the ports of Italy that traded with the East, the peddlers became familiar with complex issues of trade, commerce, accounting, and contracts. They became savvy businessmen and learned to deal with Italian moneylenders and bankers. The English, Belgians, Germans, and Dutch took their coal, timber, wood, iron, copper, and lead to the south and came back with luxury items such as wine and olive oil. With the advent of trade and commerce, feudal life declined. As the tradesmen became wealthier, they resented having to give their profits to their lords. Arrangements were made for the townspeople to pay a fixed annual sum to the lord or king and gain independence for their town as a borough with the power to govern itself. The marketplace became the focus of many towns. In the very first sentence, following the year 1000, peace and order grew. So this is what happened. And then the next sentence we have as a result. So this peace and order grew, therefore peasants began to expand their farms and villages. So one was a cause and the other is an effect. The earliest merchants were peddlers who went from village to village selling their goods. As the demand for goods increased, then the ports of Italy traded with the East. Peddlers became more familiar with complex issues of trade and accounting and contracts. So as people needed or demanded more goods, these peddlers became more sophisticated. They were dealing in much higher level trade. They became savvy businessmen and learned to deal with Italian moneylenders. The English, Belgians, Germans, and Dutch took their coal, timber, wood, iron, copper, and lead to the south, and then they came back with luxury items such as wine and olive oil. So these particular countries took their materials and then they were able to trade it for something that was a little bit more luxurious. With the advent of trade and commerce, the result is feudal life declined. Tradesmen became wealthier. The marketplace became the focus of many towns. So in this particular article, the whole idea for the author's purpose is this author is telling you because one thing happened or many things happened, here was the result. So this is an example of cause and effect. So here's a real simple graphic organizer for the structure related to town life. So the big cause for all the changes in the feudal system or medieval times was the fact that after the year 1000, peace and order grew. So that's the thing that caused everything else to change afterward. So here are some results or effects. 1, farms and villages expanded. And because farms and villages expanded, there was a demand for goods increased, so trade increased. And as trade increased, then the merchants that were selling things wanted to be more independent. So merchants gained their independence and really drove the growth of towns. This article is about medieval clothing. So again, first I'll go through it, and then we'll look for some of those keywords to help us decide, is it cause and effect, is it description, is it compare and contrast. Most people in the Middle Ages wore woolen clothing with undergarments made of linen. Brighter colors, better materials, and a longer jacket were usually signs of greater wealth. The clothing of the aristocracy and wealthy merchants tended to be elaborate and changed according to the dictates of fashion. Towards the end of the Middle Ages, men of the wealthy classes sported hose and a jacket, often with pleating or skirting, or a tunic with a surcoat. Women wore flowing gowns and elaborate headwear, ranging from headdresses shaped like hearts or butterflies to tall steeple caps and Italian turbans. Peasant clothing. Peasant men wore stockings or tunics, while women wore long gowns with sleeveless tunics and wimples to cover their hair. Sheepskin cloaks and woolen hats and mittens were worn in winter for protection from the cold and rain. Leather boots were covered with wooden pattens to keep their feet dry. The outer clothes were almost never laundered, but the linen underwear was regularly washed. The smell of wood smoke that permeated the clothing seemed to act as a deodorant. Peasant women spun wool into threads that were woven into the cloth for these garments. Since this article is broken into two distinct paragraphs, it's pretty easy to see what structure is being used. So the first thing we're looking at is, while most people in the Middle Ages wore woolen clothing and undergarments of linen, the next part is all about what the wealthy people wore. Brighter colors, better materials, longer jackets, sign of wealth. Aristocracy, which means the nobles. Aristocracy and wealthy merchants tend to be elaborate and changed according to fashion. Men of the wealthy classes, women wore flowing gowns and elaborate headwear. So the first paragraph is strictly about the clothing of the wealthier people of the Middle Ages, and very clearly it's got a subtitle called Peasant Clothing. So this particular passage is clearly a compare-contrast, because the first paragraph is strictly about the clothes of the wealthy, and then the second paragraph is about peasant clothing. And then if we were to make a Venn diagram, then what we would put in the middle, what the two groups share, is that their clothing was woolen and their underwear was made of linen. For a graphic organizer, I would use a Venn diagram, but as you can see from this page, there's not enough room. So basically what I would do is do the two intersecting circles. For the clothes of the wealthy, brighter colors, better materials, longer jackets, flowing gowns, elaborate headwear. For the peasants on the other circle, peasant men wore stockings or tunics. Women wore long gowns with sleeveless tunics and wimples. Sheepskin cloaks and woolen hats and mittens. Leather boots with wooden pattens. Outer clothing almost never washed. The linen underwear was regularly washed. For where they intersect, really the only common idea is that most of their clothing was woolen and their undergarments were made of linen. So for the last one, Medieval Village Life, I'm going to read the article, but I want you to do is look for those keywords and ideas that will help you decide whether this article is a sequence article, a description, or problem solution. So here's the article called Medieval Village Life, and that's Nori. The medieval village was the central place where people lived, worked, socialized, married, enjoyed local festivals, attended church, gave birth to children, and eventually died. Most people rarely ever ventured beyond its boundaries. Medieval society depended on the village for protection, and a majority of people during these centuries called a village home. Village life was busy. Much of this village was lived outside, wearing simple dress and living on a meager diet. Medieval villages consisted of population comprised mostly of farmers, and most of the time was spent working the land and trying to grow enough food to survive another year. So I want you to think, is anything being compared in this article? Is this a time sequence that this happened, then this happened, then this happened? Or is this a description, just giving you some of that sensory information? What did it look like? What did it sound like? So go back and highlight some of the key ideas that will help you decide, and then you should be ready to ship this off to me as soon as you can. Have a great afternoon.